What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and it's January 17th. We're probably 8 or 9 months away from your fantasy football drafts this summer, but today we are going to do a way too early 2025 fantasy football mock draft. We'll cover the first round, and then I'm going to have some honorable mentions to fill up some of the second round as well. It's going to be a PPR mock draft, and yes, it's super early, but it's also never too early to talk about fantasy football. We have the big board, which is a contest on Underdog, probably coming at the end of the month. And I just think it'll be a fun exercise to go through with the season still fresh in our mind, right? Week 18 was what, a week and a half ago. So let's talk through what a 2025 first round looks like as we sit here today in January. As always, if you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe if you're new. Let's go.
VVS stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen, she gon' let me.
Now, as always, this video is sponsored by Underdog. Of course, we have the divisional round this weekend. You have Chiefs-Texans. You have, of course, the big one, Ravens versus Bills. Make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code RON. They'll match your first deposit up to $1,000. I have links to that in the description and the comment section down below, and you'll get a free pick 0.5 total yards on Patrick Mahomes for, I believe that is the Saturday game. Now, moving on, let's get right into Sleeper. We'll just sort of do it this way so you guys can actually see what the draft board is looking like. It is just a very simple PPR 12-team mock draft. And first up, we are going to put in Jamarr Chase, however we get to there. Now, pretty simple. He led all non-quarterbacks in points per game. He went absolutely nuclear. 23.71 points per game was more than Saquon, more than Jahmyr Gibbs, more than Bijan. He was the best player in all of football. He won the Triple Crown, which is pretty nuts. 127 receptions, 1,708 yards, 17 touchdowns. He's going to be 25 years old in 2025. He's still attached to Joe Burrow. He might have T. Higgins, and he showed this year he could ball out with T. Higgins next to him, or T. Higgins could go elsewhere, and Jamarr Chase is all of a sudden he's already the number one target, but he would be the entire offense at that point. Pretty much barring injury, Jamarr Chase should eat. This Bengals defense, they just fired Lou Anarumo. It should be a very similar story next year of their offense kind of scoring in spite of their defense. Now, the second overall pick, and you could honestly make a case for him to be at 101, but again, Jamarr Chase outscored him and kind of gave you this massive edge over every other wide receiver. But Saquon Barkley was the legendary running back this past season, and for that reason, I have him as my 102. Now, I will say, this is like a mix of like how I think your drafts are going to go, and then also some personal opinion mixed in there as well. And we're far enough out that nobody really has the answers to what these drafts will look like. Now, if you wanted to take Saquon 101, you absolutely could, right? First overall, we are in a spot here where running back was hot in 2024, and that could be a trend that continues. And if you find the RB1 overall at the strongest position, that is a huge edge to be had, right? We saw this past year in 2024, wide receiver was the top point per game scorer. That was Jamarr Chase, and then the next 5 were all running backs, or if you did that in 2023, it was McCaffrey, and then it was 3 wide receivers, another running back, and then another wide receiver. So 4 wide receivers in 2023 inside of the top 6 point per game scorers, just 1 in 2024. We will see if that rebounds. Now, we don't want to overreact to what just happened, but Saquon was an absolute monster. He's probably going to be a monster again. Now, of course, there's going to be some regression to the mean, right? Like, he ran for 2,000 yards. He had his best season ever in the NFL, but he's still going to be in the range for 20-plus points per game behind Jeff Stoutland's offensive line. We don't know I think that Jeff Stoutland is like maybe retiring. He's the offensive line coach for the Eagles, but they should have a great offensive line. They should have a great offense again. They should have a lot of touchdown opportunities, a lot of scoring opportunities, and he is at the head of that. Maybe we see less tush pushes as well with the Jalen Hurts concussion before the playoffs. We'll see how that goes, but I really don't think it's all that wise to push down Saquon. Like, I think in the past I might have said, well, he's due for regression. The rushing totals can only get so high, but this is, a really, really good running back, the best in the league in the prime of his career, coming off a monster season. Definitely want to be wary about that, but also you don't want to overthink it and put him much lower than this. Now, our third overall pick, and if you wanted to make the case for him as RB1, you absolutely could, but I would argue that his offensive situation is probably nowhere near as good, and that is Bijan Robinson as our 103. He had a great season. He's not on an amazing offense. The Falcons finished 13th in points per game, which is pretty good. Solid offensive line, and they could also see with Zach Robinson in year 2 as coordinator, this offense take a step forward and become even more of a high-powered offense, and that kind of hinges on how good Michael Penix is. We'll see how that all plays out next season. Now, when we look at what Bijan Robinson did, you can see in terms of the points per game leaders, you have Jamarr Chase, then Saquon, then Gibbs, then Bijan. Those are the only 4 players this past season hit 20-plus points per game. That is a benchmark I'm usually looking for, and Bijan hit that as well. Now, not only did he hit 20-plus points per game, but after the first 5 weeks, if you just look at weeks 6 through 18, he had 22.8 points per game as the RB1 in all of fantasy. He really turned it up down the stretch, and he also got a ton of volume, which is, of course, something that we're looking for when it comes to these running backs. I'm trying to pull this up. Yeah, here we go. So you look at expected points per game, EP, 17.2 behind just Kamara in terms of your volume, right? Your carries, your targets, your red zone carries. He was second in the NFL in terms of volume, which is huge. We want volume, good offenses. We want pass-catching upside as well. He was one of just 3 running backs with 60 or more receptions. He's young. He has upside. He's one of these generational prospects, similar to what Saquon Barkley was coming out of school. So Bijan Robinson, you really can't do much wrong taking him early in 2025. And then we'll have Jahmyr Gibbs. And this one's interesting because you can truly make a case for Jahmyr Gibbs as high as first overall. It just kind of comes down to how you feel about David Montgomery. Jahmyr Gibbs, of course, finishes this past season at 21.35 points per game. A lot of that came off the back, or not a lot of that, but it was inflated a bit by a week 18 game where he had like 4 touchdowns. And then, of course, you have the David Montgomery issue. And that's kind of what this comes down to. In 3 games this past season without David Montgomery, he averaged 32.5 points per game, looking like prime McCaffrey, right? When we look at his splits here from RotoViz, he was averaging 4 receptions per game, 40 receiving yards per game, 21 rushing attempts per game. He was on pace for over 2,000 rushing yards, 28 rushing touchdowns over a full season with 691 receiving yards and 74 receptions. That's just monster work where you can see the difference between both. 47 receptions over a season-long pace with Montgomery, 74 without him. So used more in the passing game, used more in the run game. He was also really explosive down the stretch as well. So he was even like coupling that with like better efficiency on top of the volume and just kind of flashed what his true upside could be if David Montgomery wasn't around. Now the issue is you kind of have to split the difference, right? He has the trapdoor upside of if David Montgomery goes down, you have the RB1 in fantasy. But if Montgomery stays and you get 18.7 points per game, for a top 5 pick, 18, 19 points per game is fine. It's fine, but you're going to have to hit on some later picks for that to really take you to a championship. Now, the question becomes, what happens with David Montgomery? And I would lean to say, like, they really like Montgomery. He's kind of huge in terms of their culture, which they seem to value a ton, their culture. But he does have a potential out where they could cut him after this offseason. They would pretty much save $9 million and, like, pay. I don't know. I'm not the best when it comes to the salary cap, but I think the way that this is worded is they would save $8 million and then pay like $9 million against the cap, which isn't great. So I could see him, fulfilling a lot of this contract. Every year it becomes more likely that he gets cut, but cutting him this offseason, I wouldn't bet on it. So that's sort of the issue. Now, there is a chance that when we look at these splits, right, 18.7 points per game, maybe they saw what he did down the stretch and they start to slant some of the work towards Gibbs away from Montgomery. And we see that 18.6 points per game go to like 19.5 or like just over 20, even with Montgomery in the same backfield. I'd be a little bit skeptical, but you still don't want to push him down because of competition when he is in the best offense in football behind potentially the best offensive line in football. And as we saw this past year, when it comes to running back, situation matters a ton, especially for the efficiency ceiling. And I think Gibbs has everything we want at that position. Now, our wide receiver 2 here and 5th overall player, we will do Justin Jefferson. Potentially the best wide receiver in football business as usual season for him, 18.7 points per game this past year, 103 receptions, 1,500 yards, 10 touchdowns with Sam Darnold. That's about fine for a first-round pick. Again, top 2 wide receiver in football. The only thing that's really his drawback is while Jamarr Chase has Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson has potentially Sam Darnold, who we just saw look pretty brutal in this playoff game and in Week 18 against the Lions. We'll see if he gets franchise tagged or whatever, or we get J.J. McCarthy back. But my general belief is I just sort of believe in Kevin O'Connell, and even Jefferson's like fine or down years are better than most. And Kevin O'Connell has kind of proved that he gives this offense a certain floor where no matter who's at quarterback, they're going to pass the ball and score touchdowns and run this offense through Jefferson. So he's good for 18 to 20 plus points per game in any given season. And I don't want to take that for granted and put him much lower than that, which of course he also has the ceiling of wide receiver 1 overall in all of fantasy. Then at the 6th overall spot, we have Puka Nacua. And I'm just going to keep flashing this leaderboard from this past year. He was number 7 among running backs and wide receivers at 18.8 points per game this year. His only issue is that he was banged up. He only played in 11 games. Some of them were impartial, but he is just an absolute monster, Puka. He's amazing at the catch point. He's amazing after the catch. They use him in the run game. They use him across the board. He's outplayed Cooper Kupp to this point, and he's also truly one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. When we look at yards per out run this past season, he was the only wide receiver on the year to hit 3+ yards per out run at 3.56, which is just a monster number. He's a superstar. We now have his rookie year, monster year. Second year, 18+ points per game is amazing, and we could see him like really start to ascend here. Really, the only drawbacks for him are how much juice in the tank does Matthew Stafford have? It should be a high-powered offense with Sean McVay, but they were only 20th in points per game this past year. So can we get more out of Stafford? Can we get more scoring out of McVay? We shall see. And then, of course, can Puka Nacua stay healthy? Now, our next player on this list is going to be another wide receiver. We'll talk about Amon-Ra St.Brown. He is just pretty much very steady. He now has back-to-back top 5 finishes. We look here at Player Profiler. 18.6 points per game this past year, 20.7 the year before that, back-to-back wide receiver 4 point per game season. And that does illustrate how weak wide receiver was, where the wide receiver 4 last year was 20.7 points per game. The wide receiver 4 this year, 18.6. Now, Amon-Ra St.Brown, what he lost in pass volume, right? This was a team that was the 6th lowest in pass rate over expectation, running a ton, beating up on teams. He still scored 12 touchdowns as a top 5 wide receiver. That's what this offense is going to do. They are high scoring. They're going to move the ball. They're going to be highly efficient. And anything that you lose on volume, you gain from the efficiency. Now, of course, to have that monster 20+ point per game season like he had in 2023, we do need the volume. We do need the pass rate to be up. But as we see with my New York Jets this past year and with the Jalen Ramsey Jaguars with Blake Bortles, I don't know why I said Bortles, you, of course, have defenses that change a lot year to year. We shall see if the Lions defense is very good in 2025. If they're not, Amon-Ra St.Brown kind of really ascends in that scenario. But we'll see what this offense looks like without Ben Johnson as well, which could be a little scary. Then at the 108, we have our guy, Devon Achane. If we can get to him. I don't know where he's at here yet. Devon Achane at the 108. He ends up as the RB6 on the year, with 17.6 points per game, something that breaks my heart every time I look at it. In the games with Tua, this was the issue. Tua was very fragile this year. He had 11 games with Tua at 22.6 points per game, which would have been the RB1 overall in all of fantasy. The issue is that he had 6 games without Tua with 8.6 points per game, which would have been the RB38 in fantasy. Absolutely brutal. Kind of a Jekyll and Hyde situation, and it was not his fault. And the beauty of it is that he was faded due to his size, his durability, right? He plays in 11 games in 2023. He gets banged up. This year, he had like a concussion scare before the bye week, and then he was pretty much fine. He played in all 17 games. His efficiency that people were very worried about actually did crater, right? He goes from 7.8 yards per carry, which is crazy, down to 4.5, which is like fine. But what really gave him a lot of fantasy value is those 78 receptions, 87 targets. I think he led all running backs in receptions this year, or if he didn't, he was right behind Alvin Kamara, which is just monster. Now, his issue, of course, is can Tua stay healthy? McDaniel's been pretty brutal, but it seems like they're going to run it back with McDaniel, with Tua. When Tua's healthy, this offense hums. And Devon Achane, if he gets this type of receiving work, and I think that we're also due for his yards per attempt to maybe buoy back up, right? Bounce back. Not, of course, he's never going to hit 7+ yards per carry again, but could we see him kind of look like a Jamal Charles outlier year? That's certainly always in the range of outcomes with Devon Achane. And if he couples that with like 80+ receptions, then we're talking about that true RB1 overall upside where he pairs efficiency with the monster receiving volume, and then he also has the offensive environment in Miami with McDaniel to score a lot of touchdowns, and everything is all there for Devon Achane. Then at the 9th overall pick, and you make a case for putting him much higher than this, we have Ceedee Lamb. He was the 102 this past year. The vibes are down after being a top 3 pick, and he kind of was a bust this past year, 17.6 points per game, but similar to Devon Achane, it wasn't his fault. It was just simple. His quarterback went down. Dak Prescott is out for the year, and he ends up with 17.6 points per game, which is fine. But in his games with Dak, they are much more promising. In his last 25 games with Dak Prescott, he's at 22.3 points per game. And then, of course, this past year, 7 games without Dak, 16.5 points per game. So when Dak comes back, which it seems like he will, we have this from Deepak Chona here on Twitter at SportsMDAnalysis. Dak Prescott likely full strength by 2025 week 1, no mobility dip projected. So we'll see how this team looks, but as long as Dak is healthy and Ceedee Lamb is out there, Ceedee Lamb should be a 20+ point per game scorer. And that profile you could probably put higher than the 9th overall pick if you would like to. But again, this is kind of me projecting what a first round of your draft this summer might look like. Then at the 10 spot, we have, again, our guy, and it stings to see 2 of our highly drafted players be first-round picks in this next year without being like true league winners because of injuries. Of course, one to Tua, and then the second one being to Nico Collins, hamstring. But he did finish as the wide receiver 8 in points per game. He missed 5 games, and sadly that hamstring injury kind of was the end of his dominance this year. He had 7 games after his hamstring injury at 14.8 points per game. The 5 games before the hamstring injury, he was at 21.3 points per game. He was murdering out there. It looked like he was on his way to having a 20+ point per game league-winning type season, and sadly, he pulls his hamstring. That 21.3 points per game, by the way, is actually including his 1 game where he left early because of the hamstring. So he was actually more like a 23 point per game guy and was an absolute monster. And we look at over the last 2 seasons, he leads all wide receivers with 3.17 yards per out run. It is him and Puka up there with 3+ yards per out run over the last 2 years. He is an absolute monster. I think as well, I like the idea of betting on a CJ Stroud bounce back, a Texans offensive bounce back this upcoming season, if there is any discounts there. Then our last 2 players, we'll kind of bundle them together because they are the LSU boys. Both had monster rookie years. We'll put Malik Nabers here, and then we'll put Brian Thomas. And these are the ones that I'm actually unsure about in your home league. I'm curious how receptive home leagues will be to drafting Brian Thomas, as high as the 12th overall pick. But after what he did down the stretch in the playoffs, where he was pretty much the guy you needed to win your championship, or one of the guys you needed to win your championship, Brian Thomas probably got a lot of goodwill in that department. But you look here in terms of rookie point per game leaders, the top 10 all time since 1998, you have Malik Nabers, 18+ points per game behind just OBJ and Randy Moss. He scored more points per game than Jamarr Chase, Puka Nacua, and Justin Jefferson, and those guys had the quarterbacks Joe Burrow, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. Malik Nabers did it with a combination of Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, and Drew Lock, which is absolutely nuts. And then you have Brian Thomas, who did that with a combination of Trevor Lawrence, who's pretty good, but then also Mac Jones at the bottom between Michael Thomas and Mike Evans. Both of these guys look really, really special, and they're both guys I want to be betting on heading into year 2. There's some quarterback ambiguity with Malik Nabers, but again, we just saw it. Bad quarterback play, and he's still balled out. Brian Thomas, I'm actually a believer in Trevor Lawrence, and I think that could be a really nice marriage of skill sets. Now, a couple of rapid-fire honorable mentions at the end here in terms of how I would kind of map out the second round. Let's do A.J. Brown. He's always up here, and he's an amazing player, right? We look at the yards per out run stats. He's always near the top, right? 2.94 over the last 2 years. His issue is play volume and quarterback play. Jalen Hurts is never going to throw for enough touchdowns for A.J. Brown to have a monster year. He's never going to throw enough, period, for A.J. Brown to have a monster year. So that's why it's tough. Like, he's always going to be in that, like, 16 to 18 points per game. He's going to have hot stretches where he's, like, maybe at 20 plus points per game. And then something always happens with this offense where they revert back to the run game, and A.J. Brown can't break that 20-plus point per game ceiling where it's like he's the guy you needed to have. I don't think I can put him here, but at the 202, I will put down Ashton Jeanty. There's no way they have him, right? Yeah, no. I'm not even spelling this right, huh? Is there, like, anyone with the same last name? No. So what should I write as Ashton Jeanty? We will put down, I don't know. Let's just put, like, Ezekiel Elliott. Yeah, we'll just do it like Ezekiel Elliott. We'll assume, like, Jeanty could get drafted by the Cowboys or something. I don't know how. I'm trying to think of, like, how I can communicate to you guys that that's actually going to be Ashton Jeanty. Hold on. All right, that's good enough for me. Ashton Jeanty at the 202, but he could be someone that goes in the first round, especially with this running back scoring renaissance where we start to see running backs get pushed up. I guess my thought process with only 4 running backs in the first round is there's definitely like this upper echelon, and then there's a tier break to all the rest where then you can get to like Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, and we'll mention these guys as well. I think Ashton Jeanty deserves to be in that conversation as well. He's going to be like a top 10 to 15 pick. He's supposed to be this generational guy, the best running back prospect since Bijan Robinson, and you could get one of these monster landing spots like a Cowboys, like a Chargers, a Chiefs, something crazy like that, which could make him a first-round pick, as we've seen in the past with Bijan Robinson, Zeke Elliott, Saquon. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire was even like a late first his rookie year, so it wouldn't shock me at all to see Ashton Jeanty there. We'll mention another rookie too, Brock Bowers breaking the record for most receptions by a rookie despite being a tight end with bad quarterback play. You do wonder what his ceiling is with whoever the Raiders roll out there at quarterback, and what, at the tight end spot, you need touchdowns, right? You need touchdowns to be the crazy outlier. Brock Bowers had similar points per game to like Trey McBride when it was all said and done, and George Kittle. Where you get that real edge at tight end where it becomes worth taking them in the top 15 picks is you need them to separate the tight end 2 by like 2 points per game or more. We could see Brock Bowers do that. I don't want to bet against him because he's very special, and I have him as an early second here, but I'm just sort of trying to paint the picture of what the downside would be, is that we need him to hit a ceiling. We'll talk about Josh Jacobs as well. Why not? He had a really strong finish of the season, a bunch of 20-plus points, 20-plus point outings. The Green Bay Packers, strong offensive line. LaFleur is always going to score points. Josh Jacobs in that offense is pretty much a lock for like 17-plus points per game. We'll talk about Jonathan Taylor as well. He had a brutal year, but then he saved it down the stretch. He was a monster in the playoffs. I'm trying to see if I can pull up his game logs here. Yeah, what did he have? Just a casual... Yeah, this is what it was. Just a casual 39.8 points in the semifinal matchup and 27.6 in the finals. And that's sometimes all that matters, and he sort of showed what we had been waiting for, right? 218 rushing yards, 125 rushing yards, 177 rushing yards. He did 4 games in a row of 100-plus rushing yards and kind of got back looking like himself. But we'll see what this Colts team looks like next year. I'll put Breece here. I think people are going to be pretty anti-Breece, but I think the bet's still really similar, where it's like a fine Jets offense. Breece Hall is still a pretty good talent, receiving upside. It just kind of, things didn't go right for him in 2024. I'll put McCaffrey here as well. Why not? McCaffrey, if he's healthy. I got to be honest, if McCaffrey's anywhere in the second or third round of fantasy drafts, I'll probably be in. I know that he's old. I know old running backs are scary, but the receptions alone give McCaffrey the upside to outproduce any running back in all of football in terms of fantasy. I'll give Derrick Henry a shout here as well. He is, at this point, the ageless wonder. He shows me in a locker once every 2 years. He did it this past year. He was an absolute monster. And as long as Lamar Jackson's there, that's going to boost his efficiency. There's no tush-push like there is in Philly. The Ravens offense is probably like the biggest downside of Henry, but they were still like solid enough. and they're going to score points. He's going to get a lot of efficiency from Lamar Jackson, and at this point, you can't really bet on Derrick Henry slowing down. Let's just march through here. I have a bunch of guys that I wanted to just sort of rattle off. I should have said that I'll do 2 rounds here, but let's put in. I'll put Chase Brown in here. A little scary. We'll see what the Bengals do at running back. They are so depleted on defense that maybe they don't put money or picks towards running back and they just like go all in on defense. We'll see how that goes. We can also do Bucky Irving. Day 3 picks like him and Chase Brown are always a little bit scary to bet on, but Bucky Irving was an absolute monster. He looked great. He looked great in the playoff game that they lost. And as long as Baker's there and Mike Evans is there and Chris Godwin is there, it should be a high-powered offense. You have Tristan Wirfs up front as well, of course. Then we'll just do McBride. If you want a elite tight end in the second round, I think McBride is a fine pick. We'll see how much this touchdown stuff sticks. He's never had more than 3 touchdowns scored in a given season. So at this point, it's like, I don't know. You can kind of be like, well, maybe he just got unlucky, right? 147 targets, 111 receptions, only 2 touchdowns, but he only has 6 career touchdowns on, like over 200 touches. So I don't know. We'll see. But I think every player is due for a year where they just score like 11 touchdowns. George Kittle used to be a guy who couldn't score touchdowns, I believe. Let me see. I believe Kittle used to be a guy who couldn't score. You look here. Yeah, like early career, 2017, 2, 5, 5, 2, and then 6, 11, 6, 8. So I don't know. You're kind of betting on like when is McBride going to hit this mark? I could see it being any year though. And then let's do our last player here. We'll do T. Higgins. Who knows if he gets franchise tagged or signed or traded or whatever. But at the end of the day, when we look at the point per game leaders here, T. Higgins at 18.51 is probably the cheapest guy on this entire list. Kamara would be the cheapest guy on this entire list. But T. Higgins was an absolute monster this past year, even with Jamarr Chase next to him. But that's going to do it for us today. I'll just leave this up behind me. As always, appreciate you guys watching. This was just a fun video I decided I wanted to do here. I think we're going to start really looking towards Dynasty. We'll probably do some like trade targets, some Dynasty startup mocks, looking through my teams, all that good stuff, maybe a crazy ambassador video. But it's still early, right? It's January 17th. We'll see how things go. We have the Combine coming up in March. Doing a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. Got to be my own accountant. Got to tweak some of the models on the back end. But we're getting right. We'll start slowly trickling out content for you guys, and then we'll be back full steam ahead probably around like March, April. As always, appreciate you guys watching. Again, make sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. They'll match your first deposit up to $1,000 of links in the description and the comment section down below. But if you're already there or you can't support there, just leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I will see y'all in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen.